Justin Vale is a writer and analyst. He's also the moderator, whose work focuses on constitutional liberties, political culture, and tensions between free expression and modern governance. He has written extensively on civil liberties and the responsibilities that accompany open discourse. Anna Bauer is a journalist covering courts, legal accountability, and democratic institutions. Her reporting is focused on the justice system, rule of law, and the intersection of law, politics, and public trust. Nate Gowdy is a Seattle-based documentary photographer and independent publisher whose work examines American democracy under strain. He is the author of Insurrection. It's the sole book of photojournalism that chronicles the January 6 attacks on the U.S. Capitol from inside the event actually, and the book will be available for sale today at his booth. Jennifer Huddleston is a technology policy expert whose work examines the intersection of emerging technology, law, and the administrative state. She has held senior research roles focused on innovation, policy, and has published widely on topics including online speech, content moderation, antitrust, and data privacy. Together, the panelists bring complementary perspectives on the role of free speech in sustaining a free society and the institutional frameworks that protect it.
All right. I don't know about any of you or the crowd here today, but I am still flying high from this morning's U.S. men's hockey gold medal victory over Canada, following the women's gold medal, and Alyssa Liu's contagious joyful skating, and Michaela Schifrin's winning the gold on the alpine skiing. And so, you know, our Olympians have given us a lot to be proud about as Americans. But there's really few things that make me more proud to be an American than our First Amendment. 250 years ago, the founders gave us a unique and remarkable gift of the First Amendment that is the cornerstone of our democracy. It allows us to be informed, to argue, to dissent, to organize, to fairly compete in elections. Unfortunately, this cherished right is under attack. President Trump has consistently sought to use the vast powers of the government to chill his critics, whether that be using regulatory retaliation, criminal penalties, access to funding, and more. The president has sought to suppress protest across the country, has targeted civil society, nonprofit organizations, sometimes on the pretext of countering domestic terrorism, has sought to target institutions like universities, law firms, and media companies. These tactics, this is the authoritarian playbook that we've seen happen in other countries when would-be autocrats in Russia, Venezuela, Philippines, Turkey, others, have sought to chill dissent to cement their own grip on power. Now, at the same time, we are dealing with a rapidly evolving technological landscape that is shaping how we consume information, how we share information. And, you know, 250 years ago, the founders may not have envisioned TikTok and AI. As we navigate this future, we need to think about how to preserve a robust First Amendment while reckoning with the potential harms of this modern age. So let's talk about it. Jennifer, I'm going to start with you. You've been tracking closely some of the evolving threats to the First Amendment. If you can help us understand the landscape we're dealing with, and what are some of the government actions that are most alarming to you?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on the panel, and thank you all for coming out on this rainy Sunday afternoon, especially after that excitement at the Olympics this morning. I have a feeling quite a few people were up very early. And part of how I found out about that was logging onto various social media platforms. Even before I could turn on the news, I had alerts from friends sharing the gold medal victory. And that's one of the ways that technology has really enabled free expression, is that now we're hearing news from all around the world in minutes instead of hours, instead of the days it would have taken before. And that's really exciting when it comes to the opportunities for free expression. But we've also seen, not only in the US, but around the world, there have been a lot of criticisms of free expression from both the left and the right. And here in the US, while the First Amendment has remained very strong and very cherished, we have seen new attacks on by government actions that could really harm our free speech rights. Some of them include things along the lines of jawboning or censorship by proxy, where when government authorities know they can't directly engage in censorship in violation of the First Amendment, they instead go to platforms or TV stations or comedy shows and say, hey, nice platform you've got there. Would be a shame if anything were to happen to it. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. And then you see an action occur after that. This can be very difficult to push back against because oftentimes it's not happening in sunlight. It's happening behind the scenes. But we have seen when it does happen in sunlight that the American people and that many policymakers have pushed back against this sort of censorship by proxy. There are also many concerns around the rise of self-censorship or what may be happening to political dissidents out of concerns about online privacy, particularly when you see information around DHS having administrative subpoena requests for the data on those who are engaged in anti-ICE protests, as well as concerns around perhaps how the government may be pressuring online platforms to leave up or take down certain content. But it's important to remember when we're talking about the First Amendment and online speech that we're talking about the right of private platforms to make their own decision about what type of content they leave. As I mentioned, I find that online speech has been incredibly beneficial to many of us. It allows groups like Principles First to share their message, to have ideas, to have conversations in ways that would have been very difficult in an analog era. But as a result, we have to be careful that we don't see an erosion of the First Amendment in ways that could allow the government, not private decision makers, to be the ones that determine what information we're allowed to share online.
Thanks so much. And I'm going to turn to you. One other alarming trend we're seeing is a rise of the current administration using vindictive prosecutions to target its perceived critics as a result of their free speech and political activity. I know you've been tracking this and have had some interesting experiences covering the attempted prosecutions. Can you share a little bit about how this is playing out and why it is so dangerous?
Yeah, so we've seen a number of politically targeted prosecutions against the president's perceived enemies. I think the most high-profile examples include the prosecutions of James Comey and Letitia James. Most recently, there's also been other efforts to try to bring prosecutions against 6 sitting members of Congress for a video in which they accurately reminded members of the military of their duty to refuse unlawful orders. There's a number of other examples as well that I could give, but in terms of how this is playing out, if you judge the metric of success of a vindictive prosecution by the ability to convict and jail your perceived adversary for their speech or for their political activity, things aren't going very well for the administration, if that is your metric of success. In the example of the 6 sitting members of Congress, for example, a grand jury refused to indict. In the example of the Letitia James and James Comey cases, a judge found that the prosecutor who brought that case was unlawfully appointed. After that, those cases were dismissed. Prosecutors again tried to bring, at least in the example of Letitia James, again tried to bring the case a second and then a third time, and both of those efforts failed. The grand jury refused to re-indict. So in terms of those cases, which are some of the more high-profile examples, the administration has, by that metric, not exactly been successful. But to your question about why it's so dangerous, I think that the issue is that it's really not the prospect of conviction that makes it so dangerous. It's the fact of bringing these cases at all because of the effect that it has on chilling speech. because you have people who look at these cases brought against Letitia James, against people like James Comey, these high-profile defendants with lots of resources, and you sit there and you think to yourself, you know, being prosecuted costs a lot of money. There is reputational harms whether or not you are convicted. There's the indignity of being arrested, the privacy aspects of having your electronic devices and the most private aspects of your life searched. Things like that are real harms that no one wants to experience. And so you have people watching this happen to people like Tish James and James Comey, and they say to themselves, you know, maybe I shouldn't write that op-ed that I was going to write. Maybe I shouldn't go to that protest. Maybe I shouldn't run for political office because I'm putting myself and my family at risk of retaliation and targeting, and I'm not someone who has the resources that, you know, James Comey or Letitia James has. And so I think that's like the real danger here, and the real point is that even if you look at these cases and say, oh, the administration has failed to jail these people, really the harm is just the fact of bringing the prosecution itself.
Yeah, it reminds me of a term that you see some of the democracy scholars using of anticipatory obedience, that the would-be autocrat really wants people to obey in advance, and that's what a lot of this quashing of dissent and retaliatory prosecutions is about. Nate, I want to turn to you. So you have had a wealth of experience as a photojournalist, exercising your own First Amendment rights, to document others exercising their First Amendment right to peaceful protest on the ground. So I know you've been recently in LA, Minnesota, other locations. Tell us, what does exercising the First Amendment look like on the ground right now in real time?
Well, thanks, Justin. First of all, I'm real pleased to be here, if not a little nervous in front of the camera. But let's go. You know, I'm here to bring the field perspective, you know, into the broader legal and policy conversation. And I'm especially interested in how the experience of free speech changes when people feel watched, pressured, or when official narratives start to diverge from what's happening on the ground, which is what I see. The law can say you're free to speak or document, but the environment determines whether you will, which is what you were speaking to, Anna. And the First Amendment exists, state law exists, injunctions exist, but enforcement depends on the culture of power in the moment. And so as far as, you know, what do First Amendment rights look like on the ground? Well, to me, they look conditional. You know, after everything I've seen, you know, some people can be loud with little consequence, and others measure every word. It depends on who feels safe, who expects retaliation, who believes they're being watched, and who trusts the record will reflect what actually happened. The First Amendment is a promise. But on the ground, it's experienced as a set of risks. And so on paper, I have the right to photograph. On the ground, the question isn't whether the First Amendment exists, it's whether I can exercise it without interference. You know, risks such as, you know, risk about visibility, risks about enforcement, risks about how the story will be told afterward. My work is to document these conditions, not just the loud, in-your-face spectacle like the deadly mob attack on the U.S. Capitol 5 years ago, but the quieter pressures that shape what people dare to say and do and document. You know, in real time, people aren't asking whether they're allowed to speak or document. We have the First Amendment. They're asking what happens to them if they do. And
so I want to stick with that. Thank you. Yes. So thank you for what you're doing. My organization, Protect Democracy, has had the privilege of representing some protesters in Chicago and suing ICE and federal officials for excessive use of force in violation of their First Amendment rights. And so we know that the images and videos captured by photojournalists and bystanders have been essential to refuting lies, educating the public, holding government accountable. Can you tell us a little bit more about the power of digital evidence in shaping public perception?
Sure. Here, one moment. Control of the record is a form of power, and documenting the physical event is one thing. The other is, but the official language afterward tries to make things I photograph seem like something else. And, for example, when I was covering protests in LA this past summer, me and my colleagues were illegally arrested. The paperwork afterwards I'm paraphrasing, but the certificate of release says detainment or arrest plus release equals detainment. And so, there's a lot of power in them shaping the official record because other media outlets uncritically repeated that. They uncritically repeated that me and my colleagues were pretending to be journalists. And that was reported, and then USA Today corrected it. But, it's such that that kind of framing travels fast. It gets repeated, and it becomes what many people believe happened. In the digital age, the First Amendment isn't only about who can speak. It's what version of events becomes durable and lasting. Because we were in LA when we were arrested. We were zip-tied. We were processed. We repeatedly told them the law. We told the law officers the law. They told us, we don't care. And we told them again, you should care. And it just kept, and they still did, and said, we don't care, line up with everyone else against the wall. And they put us, they made our evening a headache. And so ultimately these guys either don't know the law or they're willfully disregarding it. There was a court order, there was a restraining order against them toward the press. There was an internal memo from the chief saying, the thing they cited me for was specifically the thing in that it spelled out that they should not have detained me. And it was the reason and so it's just and then I want to speak to Minneapolis. Minneapolis, I photograph spectacle, but it just shapes everything people do. I went to underground pantries. I went to churches collecting food. I met students who brought food kits to other students to take home to their families because they're too afraid to leave their home. Every other car on the street with tinted windows was suspicious. It could be armored federal agents, and it was just a state of paranoia. And I guess it's not paranoia because the threat's very real. And so it's just, I'm still processing it, and I'm still writing about it. I just think it's, once an image circulates, people project onto it what they already believe or want to say, especially when on the internet, where the context often disappears once my images are disseminated, and the commentary fills the gaps. So even when I'm trying to document conditions faithfully, my images become part of a large fight over meaning. And anyway, I could go on and on. Thank you.
I really appreciate that. Jennifer, so judging from the reactions from the crowd today, we have a lot of First Amendment supporters. But at the same time, I also suspect that many are seeing the potential harms from social media and other new technologies, including potential threats to mental health, online harassment, increasing polarization, and the proliferation of artificial images. And they may want to see some regulation of this new technology. I know you've been have a lot of thoughts on this subject, and I'm wondering if you would share your perspective on how we need to maintain a robust freedom of expression while addressing the rise of these new technologies.
Thank you. And I want to go back to something you said in the opening statement where we were reflecting on 250 years of the Declaration of Independence coming up. And one of the things or criticisms I often hear is, well, the founders never would have understood the iPhone. The founders never would have understood TikTok. They never would have understood Facebook. So, how are we to trust this document that's 250 years old? How are we to say that the First Amendment should still hold strong in face of these technologies? And I think that it's important that we remember it wasn't just luck or something that got us to this point, that got us to the First Amendment that we have today. While the founders might not have understood the iPhone or TikTok or Facebook or any other social media platform, they did understand the importance of anonymous speech. They did understand the importance of journalists being able to tell stories without the government dictating what narrative had to be attached to them. They very much understood the risk of the government being the only arbiter of truth when it came to information out there. Now, I'm not here to tell you that you should love this platform or hate that platform or what your own social media use should look like. But what I do think is in the face of growing challenges from both the left and the right, it's important that we, pun not intended, hold true to those principles first, that we look back on why is free expression so important and what is the risk if we start to give that up. The risk isn't just that the platform that you do or don't like becomes the one that is the only one available. That certainly is a risk, though, in the face of government regulation, is that the government, whether it's a government you agree with or a government you disagree with, gets to be the one to dictate what is and isn't allowed to be said, whether it's online or offline. And what we have seen time and time again is that the internet has been a place for people who might not have otherwise had a voice, whether it's young people or people in marginalized communities who might not have been able to be served by the papers of record in their town, whether it's the journalists on the streets in a place like Minnesota or even in a place like Ukraine that are able to share real images of what's going on so that individuals can know what's happening and can make decisions outside of just the narrative that they may be hearing from the government itself. And that's very important to encouraging political discourse. And I think in times of heightened polarization, it's easy, and when we see bad things happen, it's easy for us to want to say, well, we have to fix that. But fixing it could actually lead to bigger problems down the road by having the government be the ones that can dictate what can and cannot be said. And we've seen that because we've allowed the online speech market to evolve, that we have seen responses, whether it's differences in content moderation or whether it's new platforms springing up to provide new voices opportunities when they feel they might not have been served by existing platforms. And that allows all of us to have a greater opportunity for discourse than the founders probably could have ever imagined, but that I do think they would be very excited about, particularly given how many of them started out as pamphleteers.
All right. And I want to, before we get to audience Q&A, I have one more question for you. We have not seen enough energy out of Congress these days, but we have seen some positive movement in members of Congress calling for reforms to better protect our First Amendment rights, including some senators and representatives introducing the No Political Enemies Act, which would help protect against political targeting. We've seen Senator Cruz call for policies to stop the FCC from targeting media companies. I'm curious on your thoughts about what reforms might be needed and if there's any chance for any bipartisan support for these types of reforms.
Yeah, so you would hope that there is bipartisan support for protections for the First Amendment, and specifically to bring it back to the conversation that we were just having about selective or vindictive prosecutions, reforms that could help guard against political targeting to that end. However, as you alluded to, I'm not holding my breath. This Congress has not exactly been willing to reel in some of the excesses of this administration. That said, for example, the No Political Enemies Act, there are some things in that legislation that might be areas of reform that you would want to see if you're trying to do something in the area of guarding against vindictive prosecutions, things like creating a narrow statutory, Bivens claim or a civil suit that a defendant could bring if an official uses the power of the government to target them for protected speech, creating an affirmative defense that a defendant in the context of a criminal prosecution can raise by showing, substantial evidence that they've been targeted for protected speech. However, I want to say that there are some areas that make it just generally challenging for a criminal defendant to raise that type of claim. We already have something that's kind of similar in the criminal legal system called a vindictive prosecution claim that you can bring. And one of the issues there that we're seeing more and more is that, it's just really hard to get evidence to show that you have been vindictively prosecuted. So there's these problems of proof that defendants are going to face. And in people like, for example, James Comey, in that case, he's got basically like 10 years of evidence of public statements by the President of the United States saying things to the effect of, I don't like what this guy is saying about me. I think that he should go to jail. So in his case, he's not going to likely have an issue with proving some type of vindictiveness because there's all of these public statements. But you have a harder case with defendants where it seems like they are potentially being targeted for protected speech, but there's just not a lot of public evidence of that. And so in the first instance, there's going to be challenges there for those types of defendants. And what I've seen in reporting on a lot of cases in a variety of contexts in this administration is that even if you get to the discovery phase, they have been very effective at asserting various privileges like executive privilege, attorney-client privilege, that kind of thing, to bar defendants or plaintiffs from getting the type of discovery they might need to make a claim. And I will also add, too, that a lot of these things in the No Political Enemies Act, while laudatory in terms of trying to come up with some ways to solve these issues, are ultimately remedial and don't get to the thing we were just talking about a few minutes ago, where it's the bringing of the prosecution itself that does part of the harm and has that chilling effect on speech. And this doesn't quite solve that issue of like, how do you just get to a point where you don't have political prosecutions that are being brought in the first instance? And I think ultimately what that comes down to is thinking about broader institutional and constitutional reforms that may not be possible in the current political climate, but are worth thinking about in terms of, is it possible to find a way to make it such that there's a degree of independence between the Justice Department and the political pressures of the White House? And then finally, ultimately, maybe what it just comes down to is that this country should not elect people who will bring political prosecutions. So, yeah.
I think we can agree on that there is still among the American public strong bipartisan support for protecting and preserving our freedom of expression, and hopefully we can continue to demand more of our elected officials in the branches of government. I'd like to open it up to the audience if we have any questions.
My name is Julie, and I'm from Arizona, and I yesterday bought Nate Gowdy's book, The Insurrection, not because I want to see those pictures, but because I think I have a responsibility to look at those pictures. 'But I was thinking, 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 'But I was thinking But I was thinking, what do you do to protect what you made from somebody doing something, changing it to show something different than what actually happened?
I need my mic. So I thank you. Thank you for the question. And that goes along with my talking point that, after 10 years of doing this, when I started photographing right-wing extremism and the full spectrum of politics in 2015, I set out to humanize people, to bridge connection, to bring people together, to help us understand the other. But here I could take a picture at a Trump rally of a father with his son, and his father's arm is around his son, and it's a picture of the stands and all the people. And when I show it to people, depending on their persuasion, some people see wholesome participation in democracy. Other people see toxic Americana, And so I've learned it doesn't matter what I'm trying to show or say. People are going to see what they want to see. And so, for example, with my January 6th images, I could do 2 exhibitions with the same images. And the words I put under them are gonna, it depends on the usage of words. I could call them rioters in one framing, and I could call them freedom fighters in the other. And that's where we're at, just 2 totally separate information streams. And so I just, I guess I don't have a, getting back to the question, I guess, my first thought was, well, I need an offsite. I need to protect my actual files because I'm here. I am coming out of Minnesota, checking my pre-check status because I met people who'd actually had it taken away and they hadn't been cited with a thing. They'd been targeted by the government, and anyway, and so I think kind of losing my way, but I think. What I do to distinguish, I try to do my books, and I try to be very intentional with my words that I put with my images when I have the power to deliver them to an audience such as this. And so my route is bookmaking, where I get to dictate, the context. But otherwise, a really good question.
Right.
Hello, my name is Trent from Alabama. My question is about, do algorithms that pick which things to amplify fall under freedom of speech? People can say things, but amplifying isn't necessarily required.
I think we'll turn to Jennifer for this one.
Yeah, so this is a difficult question. Algorithms can be incredibly beneficial. And what we have seen, if you look at a set of cases that came down called the net choice cases, it seems likely that algorithms are covered by the First Amendment when they're used in the content moderation decisions. We haven't seen, how far certain applications would extend. The court has not directly answered this question, but I think oftentimes we hear algorithms vilified without thinking of the positive examples that algorithms can have. So while there are certainly concerns about algorithms potentially leading individuals down dark paths based on patterns of behavior, there are also a lot of cases where algorithms are incredibly key to keeping spam and other lawful but awful content that your average user doesn't want in their feed out of their feed. Algorithms are critical to things like parental controls, and they're also critical to helping us discover new information, to helping us discover things like your photographs, or to helping us discover information from lawfare or any other thing based on our interactions and our information that we wouldn't have discovered just by clicking through on our own. So I think that it's important to recognize that algorithms can actually help expand expression as well and can be incredibly valuable there. And it goes back to the question of, well, what should the response be? In my opinion, we shouldn't seek to regulate algorithms by the government, but instead, if you don't feel that the type of algorithmic content that you're receiving from a particular platform is serving you, look for what alternatives are out there, or look for what features are available to you as a user that can help you create an ecosystem that would better serve you.
Great. I think we have time for one more from the audience.
Hey, Nate. It's loud. I heard perhaps because you wrote the book, you were asked to give witness testimony against some of the people who were participating in the January 6th insurrection. And I heard that since Trump pardoned them, you have even interacted with some of them face to face. What can you tell us that helps us understand who these people are, what brought them there, what their goals are, perhaps how we can build bridges with them in particular?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Skeet. What a question. Yeah, we've had, that day has shaped the last 5 years of my life. The book took writing and researching and editing, sequencing the images with timestamps to use each image as a plot point to introduce a different part of that day in order to make sense of readers. In doing that, I had to fill my head and watch every documentary I could get my hands on and fill my head with every book or article I could to help me understand and flesh out my own experience. And a lot of these people, I've been to over 60 MAGA rallies. Actually, 1 year ago today, we were here, and we met the Proud Boys. We had a hunch they'd be at the bar downstairs, the most prominent, outspoken ones. Oath Keepers, too, and, Stuart Rhodes. And anyway, they were all hanging out, and I have, a couple years ago, I testified against the founder of Cowboys for Trump. And I testified alongside Officer Daniel Hodges, who spoke here yesterday. He was the officer who was crushed in the in the tunnel. And we got acquainted, and it just, basically it was the first time someone had been determined to be an insurrectionist in Civil War times in a court of law. And then the book was used as evidence of insurrection in the Colorado ballot trial that went to the Supreme Court. And so I gave my photos to the FBI. I'm trying to catch these guys, but at the same time, we've gotten to know some. And when I meet people at Trump rallies or at the J6ers, a lot of these people I like. The fundamental difference is they believe a lie, and they've been fed a lie. But I trust them, and they obviously trust us and let us in. They know our political persuasions are different, our leanings. They know about my book, yet they still want us to listen to them. They want to be heard, and the one thing, is the more you listen to them, the more they think they're winning you over, and they like the attention, obviously, but it's I don't know, it's a surreal experience going to a steakhouse dinner celebration of a prominent J6er the night he gets out of the DC jail after, me and my partner went after her photos were used against him by the DOJ. And I really want to explore this, but I think a lot of these people were brought there that day. They were brought to Trump because they were radicalized through trauma. And that, and my partner's been on that beat for a long time, and we'd really like to explore that more. It just takes, journalism's in a bad way right now, and we just need institutional support, and book is my way of kind of helping us break even and keep doing what we're doing to exercise our First Amendment rights.
Well, thanks for doing what you're doing. Before we exit the stage today, we have time for one more quick question. So I'm going to ask all of our panelists to share something that gives them hope about the future of the First Amendment in America. And I'll start with you.
Yeah, okay. So I have kind of mentioned this as we've been discussing the context of vindictive prosecutions, but grand juries give me a lot of hope. I remember when I was in law school thinking that the grand jury was not an effective bulwark against, misuse of prosecutorial power. There's a saying famously that a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. But in fact, we're figuring out that there's a lot of ways in which grand juries will refuse to indict ham sandwiches or people who throw ham sandwiches, and so I think the grand juries and people who do their civic duty by performing jury service give me a lot of hope.
Wonderful. Nate?
The people of Minnesota gave me a lot of hope. My first our first trip with a I have over 100 friends and colleagues, all photojournalists and documentarians, were on the ground in the Twin Cities last month, and none of them have much to their name. Most of them are just hoping to break even. So that's the reportorial side of it. But the people, sorry, the second trip we spent time, instead of tracking the feds, the agents terrorizing the city in this occupation, the second trip we spent talking to community members, and we spent the whole day at the country's largest Somali mall, 4 floors of shopkeepers, and these people told us they hadn't had a sale in 2 months, and yet they still, when we went to spend our money there and support them, they still wouldn't let us pay, and they are the best of us, and the helpers, so many people, in churches and neighborhoods, you got people in sub-zero temperatures standing there with a whistle, looking out. And this general strike, first one in this country in 80 years, brought out 50 to 100,000 people, and it was 40 below after wind chill, or with wind chill, and the New York Times 2 days later on their Sunday edition put a block of ice on the Hudson as their lead photo on the paper, and they need to do better. But anyway, I'm going on and on. Excuse me,
Jennifer?
Yeah, that's beautiful, and it's hard to follow. Mine is also the people, but it's the people in a different way. It's the people in that the First Amendment itself remains very strong, no matter what polling may say. What we've seen time and time again is when we see those true tests, whether it's the FCC saying we can do this the easy way or the hard way, and you get both Senator Cruz as well as many on the left coming out and saying, this is too far, this is not what we do here in the US. Whether it's the reaction to the murder of Charlie Kirk, where again, we saw people across the political spectrum, regardless of whether they agreed with Charlie Kirk's positions or not, saying, this is not who we are, this is not what we do, we have to be better when it comes to the culture of free expression. And so while free expression is certainly under threat, both here in the US and around the world, the fact that we as an American people still stand up for the First Amendment and that the First Amendment still stands strong when it faces challenge gives me hope that it continues to be one of the most exceptional things about us 250 years into our country.
Well, I am struck that all 3 of these answers really came down to the people, because ultimately the survival of our democracy is going to depend on the courage of the American people. And so I am thankful to be with all of you here today, with our panelists, as we can all recommit to making sure that the First Amendment survives for another 250 years. Thank you to Principals First, and thank you to all for being here today.